Bonjour. Bonjour à tout le monde.
Hello everybody. Many thanks for your presence amongst us at our session. This will be moderated by Astrid de Germay from the Horus Development Finance company. Astrid is a specialist in digital finance, and I will also moderate as myself also a senior expert at Horus Development Finance in financial inclusion and inclusivity. We'll talk to you today about the important aspects in terms of digitalization and numerization of financial services and processes and channels and distribution channels. The goal is, of course, not to, regarding the time that we have together, not to give you a detailed overview, but rather to show you some important aspects that we need to bear in mind and take into account in any digitalization project. So we will now talk to start with about what we can talk about, what we can understand by digitalization and numerization, and then what we can numerize and digitalize, and then afterwards we will show you the added value that we can create maybe for clients and employees of a financial institution, and how eventually the business models of this institution can be affected by the digitalization of these processes and services. And finally, we will talk about how we can analyze the digitalization project. And if time allows us, we will end by showing you some aspects of the management and governance of the data, as you will see that these are some topics that are strongly linked to the digitalization and digitization themes. So I will now give the floor to my colleague Astrid de Germay, who will start by talking to you about these topics. Many thanks, André. Hello, everybody. Maybe as an introduction, what do we mean by digitalization and digitization? It seems absolutely essential for us to clarify these two key terms in our presentation before going further. Digitization is the conversion process of the physical data. These physical data are transformed in a numerical format. And what this means is that, quite simply, when we enter some data in the information system of the institution, we deal with digitization. When we create a document, so a paper document that is scanned, such as a loan contract, which would then appear in a PDF format, we are dealing with digitization in the same way as when we scan some ID cards. We can then convert some data that are physically present on an ID card in numerical data. And then finally, the signification of the digital signature, which is sometimes a very important aspect in order to digitalize much more the different contracts, such as, for example, registration contracts and so forth. As for digitalization, which is different from digitization, this is the integration of the digital technologies in the commercial processes. So you will therefore have understood that to start with, before digitalization, you need to have your digitization of the data available. So therefore, digitizing the data is a preliminary step to the digitalization. So to give you some examples, for example, when you will look for some loan contracts that will be stocked on the cloud, you will use research criteria, you will use a client number, a client name. We're dealing with a digital process. Another digitalization example is when you commercialize some products with an algorithm to categorize clients. This Client categorization is developed from some data, including some behavioral data, such as recent purchases, the use of financial products, the use of socioeconomic data, such as your income, your age. Thanks to this different data, you will be able to propose and commercialize some products that will be adapted to your clients. So, what can we numerize or digitalize? Well, first of all, we have given some examples regarding the digitization. Thanks to the digitization, we will have some increased analysis possibilities, for example, especially with some data that are quite common, such as the name, first name, surname, address, gender, age of the person, that will enable us to analyze and reach certain goals. For example, with the gender, we will be able to offer some products that will be specifically tailored to women. Other interesting data to analyze, the date, the amount of a transaction, but also the nature of a complaint, the topic of a client question. These are as many criteria that will enable us to carry out some analysis and to be more efficient. For example, being able to analyze some transaction amounts will enable us to see the periods in the months during which the client will have such and such needs. So digitizing such data enables us to carry out some analysis accordingly, and as we were saying earlier on, the digitization is a preliminary step before the digitalization. What can we digitalize? We can digitalize some processes. Digitalizing some processes enable us to have some targeted operations and to take some decisions. So the digitalization of the processes has a main end goal, which is the cost reduction, increasing efficiency, and reliability, as well as risk reduction and revenue increase. I'll give you some examples here so that this will give you a better idea of what I'm talking about. For example, if we're talking about a client process, then digitization of the digitalization of the process used to open an account is something very interesting, because it's not about opening an account, for example, simply on the ground. For example, we will just be dealing with a channel, albeit a digital channel, but yet digitalizing the whole of the account opening process will enable, for example, to carry out the verification of KYC to verify if my client is registered and is blacklisted, etc. So, therefore, the digitalization of the whole process will enable me to deal with more rapid treatment and more reliable treatment regarding a process that will, for example, have remained a manual process. Another example, for example, that I can mention to you is how to deal with finance demand in a digital manner by sending some information to a client profile. So once again, our client profile, I have the possibility to identify my client thanks to my digital data or digitized data. Another example that I can give you is the fact that we often talk about the client process when we talk about digitalization, and we wanted to give you an example about internal processes. For example, in digitalizing the processes, I can optimize my liquidity, the management of my liquidity. I can draft some reports regarding the liquidity risk and anything that is related to attributing scoring thanks to some data and aggregated data. That could be quite interesting in order to take some decisions afterwards. And the digitalization can also enable me to extract a list of candidates in order to register them, for example, and to offer them, for example, a training session. The digitalization also enables us to digitalize some services regarding digitalization of services. What is the goal that we are after? We will reduce some tasks that represent low added value. For example, we will be able to organize some tasks within the agency, for example, by diversifying the profiles. For example, This will maybe tell you a little bit more when you're asking for the amount in the real amount in the account of an institution. Will be able, for example, to consult the amount in their account from their smartphone or their mobile phone, even if it's not a smartphone. And this will mean that they would not have to go to the agency and to request the agency staff behind the counter. And therefore, this will enable us to rethink and reorganize the counter agent at the bank by maybe reducing the time spent at the counter and maybe enabling them to give more added value activities. Another example I can give you, which is how to automatically renew a loan. We're talking about a loan that could be carried out digitally. The request could be carried out digitally. The analysis could be totally digital, and renewal request can be validated once again in digital fashion. So once again, we are reducing some tasks that could be carried out automatically or via some digital analysis. The last point that I can mention in terms of the elements that we can digitalize, which are the distribution channels. Oftentimes what we think about most often in terms of the digitalization of the distribution channels, this will enable us to have facilitated access where we have an instantaneous proximity thanks to some digital channels with some channels that did not exist previously. I can give you some examples here in that area. Once again, the fact that we could, for example, disburse a credit on an electronic wallet, on the client's electronic wallet. The client will not have to go to the agency to perceive the disbursement of their credit or to get a check that they can then go and then put in another institution. Another example regarding financing demands via some e-commerce sites. And especially in Africa, we have the case of Guinea, who have some partnership with some financial institutions. So on the Guinea sites, for example, we have some ways sometimes that enable us to ask for some financing from the Guinea platform.
Telecom operator today, we can do some demands of financement through those channels. And it wasn't yesterday. It wasn't some stakeholders, financial stakeholders, but today we have the operators, and you can do your request of financial. The last example, the financial services from the operators that are using some terminals. This enables to avoid to the clients to go to the agency. And so when we have a network of agencies good developed, the clients can have access quite easily to an agent and in proximity, so they don't have to use the transport, and they can just go very, very near, and they can do some financial transaction quite easily. The second point that is interesting today is creating some added value, whether it is for the clients and for the employees, and to see how the business models will be impacted by these new items, digitalized items. The first point for the clients, the beneficiary of the digitization, our first ones, because of the digitization, the subscriptions are done easily. For example, for opening accounts, for asking for some credit, for some insurances, the client will be able to do this request at home with an agent that comes, or also with a self-service, which means in autonomy without smartphone and without a phone. The transactions are far quicker and easier for the client. The cost of transaction are cheaper because of the digitization, especially for the disturb and for the reimbursement of credit. The digitalization enables to the client to have easier transactions, either at home, as I said, and maybe with some agents that come at home, or either at proximity. The transfer of money, whether it's national transfers or international transfer, will be quicker or even kind of immediate transfer. It will be transfer person to person or business to business transfer. We have many corporate clients that do transfer through digital tools. And when I say digital tools, I mean about the electronic wallet, but also some tools offered by the banks and the institution of microfinancing. The transaction and everything to do with deposits are easier as well with digitization. They can be done without having to go on site, and so really will be done also quickly. So, for example, if you have cash to deposit, I can deposit at a partner, a third party nearby, rather than go to the agency. I can do it in autonomy independently with my bank application from my current account to a deposit account, for example. And again, the payments are also facilitated through this. In terms of financial information, we have spoken earlier about the request of the balance of that we can do either at a distance, remotely. The digitization allows to have some financial information all the time, for example, balance, credit, and also some information about contents. For example, we can ask for some information, for some services, and also in the last case that we put here, the identification. We have some clients, for example, who are not really have any identity documents, either that are not valid or don't have any. For example, in some country, and thanks to certain companies who are specialized in identification documents, they can do some research based on the phone numbers and names, and are doing some research on social networks, and to check that this person is a real person and that their name is matching their phone number. Other kind of benefits from the digitalization, the employees benefit from it as well. We spoke a little bit before from the client side, but also the digitalization allows to gain some time for some tasks that are not really a lot of interest. For example, the employee can focus on tasks that have more added value. The employee benefits as well from the digitalization for the management of human resource. For example, some evolving within in terms of career that are easier with the digitalization. For example, there is a list of jobs that are vacant and to be sent to all the company. And there be also easier access to various information, and also on training, and for example also remote training, and that even some people, for example, that don't live near the headquarters could benefit from remote training. The institution, in its global name, benefit also. We've spoken about the client, we've spoken about the employee, and the corporation will also will have gains in terms of efficiency. They will reduce the cost, the operation. They will reduce the operation risks, and we will speak more about it later on. And also they benefit from the digitization because some of the decision will be better guided by some objective criteria. So we're reducing the risks and increasing the income. We spoke about it a little bit earlier on when we spoke about the data, numerous data, and we will have some objective data and criteria, and that will be enabling to take some informed decisions. Here, we are going to give you 3 examples of added value for clients or employees, and we will see the impact on the business model. The first example that we have chosen to present you today, maybe because it does create some interest and some curiosity of many people. There's a nano loan that are digitized. So we're speaking about the very small loans that are often expensive and that need a long time to be created manually. For example, in the microfinance, we're speaking about loans of very small amount, but with many clients. And there is a lot of demand from the population that doesn't have any bank account. So small loan, long-term small. So the digitization solution that have been offered for this kind of products is the automatic decision. What does it mean? It means that we have data from our clients. We have some data related to transaction, airtime, and money transfer from the client. We are going to analyze the different credit, consummation of calls, for example, SMS and so on. In terms of transfer money, if there are any, we will see the amount of those transfer and the amount of this money transfer. And all this data are feeding some algorithm, and then we'll be able to get a score. And this score, if it's greater than a certain value defined by the lender, will validate the request of financing. The process is also digitalized. We have a client who, for example, makes a request with his phone without going anywhere. We have a notification whether the request of the loan is validated or not, and then we have the disbursing and the reimbursement that's done by the client by the digitalized wallet. This automatized loan, a small amount, the Safaricom and the Commercial Bank of Africa has launched M-Shwari, which has been the first example of nano loan in Africa. We have also the partnership between Orange Money and PRM, the Première Agence of Microfinance. This partnership has been allowed in Madagascar to have some loan in 2018, and then in the Mali between 2018 and 2019. For the customer, of course, the added value of this kind of product is the fact that it's instantaneous and the proximity. So with the stamps that we have offered, the client asks a credit from his phone. It's not even necessary to have a smartphone. With a communication with USSD, the client can request some credit. The scoring of the financial institution will use those data from the operator telecom to validate the request. the customer is immediately notified, and if he's eligible, he receives the amount of the credit directly on his electronic wallet. Why do we have here a transformation of the model? We have in a case where the financial institution lend some money without having access to his customer. The telecom operator uses the data of his clients in order to communicate a score to the financial institution, and the score is a result from the algorithm and the data that have been sent to the algorithm, and the financial institution does not have access to the data of the new client. They don't have the proximity with the client. There is no direct link with the client. So the microfinance, one strength is this proximity between the lender and the client. So there's transformation of the model, because also there's some telecom operators, they enter the financial sector. And those operators have all those data from the clients and to be able to analyze their behavior. The risk that are perceived in this kind of new model is lending, because they're not kind of classic, because they're not registered in the risk central. We have also an institution that lends some money but doesn't control the data from the clients. Sometimes they even don't have any control over the algorithm that defines the score. It's a transformation of what we know so far. So there is a kind of a control that is a smaller control through all the process. And the last risk is also a great dependence with the operator telecom, and there's a big terms of trade balance between the financial institution and the operator telecom.
Very well. So I will now carry on with other examples. We wanted to show you an example where the digitization of data and the digitalization of processes employed in order to personalize and tailor to career management and promotions. So credit management and promotion. So what is our problematic here? We typically have a financial institution with quite a high number of employees, and employees who work in some areas that could be working in silos such as marketing, management, etc. And therefore, they also have in these areas quite a partial vision of opportunities that might present themselves and exist within the financial institution. So this is the main issue. So the digital solution, first of all, enables us to help with the decision and how does that happen with some data that are being collected when these are digitalized, exist on the data themselves, such as their age, profile, assessment, evaluation, performances, etc., of these employees. And we also have some data on the needs of the institution in terms of the positions to be occupied or the profiles required and needed. And we also have some data on the internal training and internal positions that are available. And by dealing with this particular data and managing this data, we manage to structure some training proposals as well as some career plans that can be relayed to the employees, or in any case, they can be accessible for the employees on a visualization tool for the employees of the financial institution. So We also have, and you will see this on the screen right now, as you have on the screen right now, we also have some help on the processes as the employees can register online to some training courses and training sessions. They can take part in the assessment and evaluation processes once again online, and they can also express their interest for some positions aside from the training courses themselves. So what is the added value for the employees? Well, first of all, they can be informed on the opportunities, and also they can benefit from a greater transparency on the decisions that can be taken as for their particular evolution within the company. Do we have a real transformation of the business model here? I would say yes, in a way, because we can say that with a tool such as what I've described here, we also have an internal service market that appears within the company. So, of course, this needs to be explained clearly to the employees of the company so they can understand clearly how the system works, and therefore they can use this efficiently. And this is done within a change management approach. This is a very important thing. And regarding the risk, we can say that principally we're dealing with some cultural risks in the way that such a process, such a digital process will need to be inserted appropriately within the enterprise culture, knowing that the enterprise and the company itself might not necessarily wish to grant too much freedom of choice to their collaborators and their staff, as they want maybe to approach much more in a much more discretionary manner in order to not go across their management prerogatives. So, of course, you have some cultural risks that you need to assess and manage accordingly. If I can have the next slide, please. Many thanks. Here we also have another example which means the targeted research. This is also a real example which was taken from Finca in the Democratic Republic of Congo. What was the issue and the theme? Well, first of all, Finca and the RDC noticed that more than three-quarters of the transactions with their own clients was taking place accordingly with the agency's network, but therefore these were concentrated in their biggest cities. So therefore, noticing this, they wanted to extend their third-party networks, third-agent networks all throughout the country, but on the basis of a preselection of the best agents' profiles in order to gain some time, because there are a lot of possibilities. So we generally have some small traders in the small cities, and therefore it could cost a lot of money to base selection on the complete list of these potential agents. So therefore we need to have a means to pre-select them. So therefore the digitalization was useful, and it consisted in carrying out an analysis on the basis of the data on the existing agents, on the basis of the socio-demographic data on these agents, on the activities, on their finances and so forth, and as well as on their behavior too, including with some data gathered from the observations of the Finca agents, such as how they welcome people and how these agents behave. So all this data on the existing agents were historical data which were then digitalized, which was an enormous piece of work, as not everything was digitalized. Of course, as for the data on transactions and the volumes, that was digitalized, but that was not necessarily the case for the socio-demographic data and observations carried out by agents. So therefore, we had to digitalize, or rather, we had to digitize this data, enter them in the database, and then afterwards we needed to standardize this in order to be able to use them accordingly. And then finally we needed to use a tool such as a business intelligence tool in order to develop a predictive model that could be considered of indicating what could be considered as a good agent. So there was a correlation study carried out in order to know the criteria that revealed some good performances. And what came out of this at the time was that gender, which means man or woman, the type of business activity, and the fact of reinvesting the profits in the business activity from the agent or not, were some essential criteria. So from these three criteria, it was much easier to then have a pre-selection of the agents in the smallest cities in order to therefore contact them afterwards and then go for a recruitment process. So, as for the added value for the institution, it is clear these were some decisions based on some objective criteria, which represents a huge savings in terms of the time involved in that matter. In terms of the business model, there was no transformation of the business model, as we are not looking at a transformation, but rather to reproduce the existing model and working with third-party agents. However, this method has shown the necessity to set up management and governance, data management, and we will talk about that later. As for the risks, we did not notice any particular such risks. So, as for the next two slides, I want to show you that there are some examples that illustrate the manner in which the data can be exploited. Of course, if such data exists and if the data has been digitized previously. So how can we use this data in order to create some value for the enterprise company, for their clients, and for the employees? So here are some examples on screen that I can mention to you quickly in terms of marketing, for example, in the marketing area, with the goal to activate or reactivate some clients or client bases who do not use the services or do not use them much. It is possible with some digital technologies to test, for example, some messages of different kinds via client chatbot. So chatbot is a program that establishes a conversation with a person for a few minutes, giving them the impression that they are conversing with a real human being. And this enables, by gathering some data with the messages from the client, to choose the best messages according to the intensity of the client's reactions to that particular message and the kind of reactions that this has led to. And therefore, we are not prescriptive level of observation where we have an analysis that enables to prescribe what kind of message will have the best chance to be heard and to move things forward. In terms of the internal control and permanent control, with the goal to respect the Lab FT standards. As my colleague Astrid mentioned earlier on, we can identify some suspicious transactions thanks to some digital technologies in terms of the risk management, in terms of the credit risk management. We can operate and elaborate some scorecards based on some scoring systems based on the client's data and past client's behaviors, and we can also add some data coming from a credit bureau. As for the area managing the liquidity and the cash flow, we can analyze the depositors' behaviors. These are often seasonal, and we can enrich our management model. And in our management model, we can analyze the achievements and prove what were the determining factors for better performance or performance below par by different sets of products, and whether this is related to the performance on the markets, maybe because of the prices that would be set up too low or badly negotiated, or with some insufficient volumes, or where some products were not sold in as great a quantity as planned, and therefore the structure of the products that were sold, or whether this performance below par was due to the risk management or due to the costs and the operational cost. So, regarding the operations, we can optimize the operational performances, for example, by monitoring the work charges by agent and by times and time periods by process. So, for example, we can also identify some employees that represent high risk of leaving the company, for example, and to that end, we exploit some data from the operations regarding the workloads, mistakes or errors committed, but also some data on employees with some evaluation profiles and their past mobility. And therefore, we have some expert systems that also exist here and that are part of the digital world, which enables us to carry out this task. And in terms of marketing and operations, finally, we can try to understand the reasons for the non-use of services by analyzing some operational data, as well as the characteristics from the clients, as well as the complaints or the questions asked by the clients. So, we can see quite clearly that we have many possibilities to use some data in order to create some added value. And all the cases that I have presented to you in our common jargon of data managers, we're talking about use cases for this particular data. So, as the same data can be used for many uses, we will see that it's important to ensure the good management of the data within a complete framework and setup of this data management. And this is something that we'll cover in a few minutes. Right, I will now give the floor back to my colleague.
Thank you, André. So we're going to do a last part before we're going to the data management. We're going to look how we analyze a project of digitization. The project is analyzed following 5 acts. The first is alignment, strategic alignment. Secondly, the added value. Third point, the control of the processes, the control of the capacities. And then an axe of cost and benefits and partnership. For the strategic alignments, it is very important to validate the strategic objective that the project contributes to. Believe me, often we have some clients that solicit and some help in digital products, and you want to integrate into digitization without having any link with the targets of the institution. A project, whether it's digital or not, must be analyzed and compared to what we want to contribute to. Do we want a bigger part of the market? Do we want to kind of target some new clients? Or increase some service towards target clients? Does the project means reducing the costs or reducing the risks? Or does our project is it to contribute the income? Of course, you could say the project should have all those 4 points. And yes, often a project will contribute to many targets for the institution. But however, it's important to know what our motivation is when we launch a digital project, and to look which one are the targets of the company. the project will, of course, will disturb the business model. Are those disturbances acceptable? Can we manage them? Is the institution ready to lose such kind of type of clients? Are they ready to transform, for example, the job of the credit officer? These kind of elements have to be taken into account. Before, we have seen an example of automatic renewal of some loans. We are a kind of a product that is different from kind of the traditional support and assistance that are offered usually to the clients. So these kind of things need to be thought about and have to balance the pro and the what's against it. And the last point, maybe the most important one, the project and all the implications linked to this project, are they understood? And are they supported by the higher instances of the institution? In other words, it's imperative that the whole institution agrees with the project and give the backing of the project, especially the management, but also the board and so on. Here we're speaking about projects that will be a revolution, will transform our job. And it's very important to have the whole of the management and sponsor to have the backup. We were speaking about the analysis of the added value, the control of the processes, the validation of the capacities and the cost. On this slide, you can see on the business model, we have many things. As you can see, and we have spoken about it previously, the strategic objective, what is it? Today, do I have a problem or do I have a wish for a share of market type of clients? Or is it for my employees? Or have I given myself the means to check that this feeling, that this wish, by doing some research, deeper research, for example, market research, market survey, and so on? The answer to these questions has been quite simple. Very recently, with COVID, we wanted to allow the clients and the employee to be able to carry on, to do the transaction necessary in an environment where we needed to have a social distancing. The question was, by which services are we going to start with, and what are we going to do? Once we have a proposal of value, then we're going to get interested the chain of value. What are we going to digitalize? Are we going to speak about the accounts or the data or the channels? Should we suggest digital channels, or should we keep some physical channels? Knowing that the various components of the value chain, we need to ask ourselves, what do I wish? Do I want to carry on managing in internal, or what do I want to be managed by some third parties? The institution wish to control a total control of the whole chain, or do we want a shared control, or are we ready and willing not to have a full control of one of the components? On the question of the data, and we'll speak more in details afterwards, and I was speaking before about it with the digital credit, with the telecom operators. The question is, to whom belongs the data? What kind of data am I ready to share with a partner? And lastly, the project must be analyzed in terms of cost and benefits, profits. The income and the cost, how are they calculated? If I have a target of client retention, maybe we will not have some incomes that are easily put into figures. But the client retention is a benefit, that will allow me to validate or not the fact to launch this project. If I'm with a partner, am I ready to share my profits? And also my objective of reducing the cost. By cost, we include as well the cost of risk, and this cost is sometimes difficult to evaluate. Or am I in a project that will improve my operation efficiency? So this analysis of cost and risk, it's important not to only consider the financial cost, but also to include all the points of that need attention within the project. I comment as well, once we have done our analysis on these different elements linked to the project. As I said previously, with the example of the COVID, we needed to put a priority. Of course, it wasn't possible to digitalize everything, all the processes, all the services related to the client and the employees and the institution itself. To put a priority, we have some methods that exist, that a general method, not only for the digital method, but generally for projects. For example, recently I've used the method RISE. I'm not sure whether some of you are familiarized with this project. R for reach, the number of clients and number of users that we reach, and related to compared to a frequency. E for impact, so we speak about rentability, whether it will a big impact, a medium impact, or a big impact. C for confidence. Do we trust this project? What is our confidence? Is the ambitious project, or that we win? E for effort. So we speak about the complexity of the project and in terms of budget. This method called RISE enables us to obtain a score depending on those 4 criteria and so that we can give a priority to the projects from the higher score to the lowest. And then the institution can know with which project to start, for example, in the context of COVID. The last point of analysis for a project, and it's very important in terms of the partners. When I'm thinking about starting a project with a partner, I'm looking what are the strengths of this partner. Why and in which way does the partners need me? Sometimes we have some regulation, which enables us to answer very quickly to this question. For example, does a partner does it need to have access to my clients, to have access to my expertise? It's very important to see what each partner brings to the partnership. In some countries, for example, I can give you an example. The telecom operator can't emit some electronic money. They can only distribute it. For example, in West Africa, we have EOB, intermediary in the bank operations. They are actors. They need a banking partner. So each regulation area will kind of highlight some partners, some partnership that are kind of obvious we could have other choices of partners that could be motivated by other criteria. What kind of resources do I bring to my partners, or that my partner brings to me that I couldn't have otherwise reasonably or in time? For example, the network is a very important criteria. For example, I have a network of banks, or on the other hand, my partner has some agents in every city of the country, in an area where I am not implemented. So in this case, a partnership is interesting. And also, what kind of precaution do we need to take so that the partnership is equitable? And it's very important that a contract is set up so that each partner does respect their obligations. Sometimes some partnerships seems not balanced because of some partner that seems stronger than others. So it's very important to take really the time to define a contract and to define all the clauses of the partnership, so that it's at least balanced, or if not, at least accepted by all the partners. Here you can see an example of a partnership between a bank and a fintech. On the left, the fintech strength is to work on the short cycles, and it's being very quick in terms of creation. And the bank has a good knowledge that the fintech may not have. For example, a customer base also very developed, and good mastership of the financial services, and also capacities that the fintech may not have, depending on the regulation in the countries. The fintech will be able to benefit from the strengths from the bank. They will have a regulation help, and sometimes they will kind of scale up far quicker than they could do it client by client and partner by partner. And on the other hand, the banks, what they look for in the fintech is a reactivity, quite quick, and also because all the services get far and far more complex. Some fintech can really grow very quickly in some kind of targets of customers. And it's a strength that some banks don't have at some point. And the banks will therefore benefit from this strength, from this point. I suggest you now, very quickly, if you want to keep some time for the question answer, to speak about management and the governance of the data. And André is going to carry on speaking about it.
Merci.
Many thanks, Astrid. And many thanks also to our participants. You have answered some of the poll questions that we have put your way, and we will talk about that a little after we finish this co-presentation that I would like to cover in order to attract your attention on the importance of the management and of data, because as I stated earlier on, when a financial institution starts digitizing its data and then digitalizing its processes, services, and distribution channels, they notice very quickly that they gather a growing mass of data that will need to be managed, especially as this will be some data that could be used for some other goals different from the main management of operations itself. So I will say a few words about this, and I will start by showing you this slide on the screen, which in the end sums up three main facts that you need to be aware of. First of all enterprises and all financial institutions in particular use data which are partly digital. The second fact is that in an ecosystem that is more and more digitalized, the data becomes first category asset. We can say that this is our goal for the 21st century, who has data has value, because not only this can be used in order to create some added value, as we have demonstrated with a few examples earlier on, but we can also sell this data or share this for some payments in return. The third fact is that the data these days exist within the institutions under different forms and in different databases, which often do not communicate well amongst themselves. And oftentimes they have some data registries which are set up in different formats, which are not necessarily compatible amongst themselves. So the tendency these days is to set up some management and governance data systems that cover all of the quality, reliability, security, safety, and also, let's not forget, confidentiality aspects of the data, with the main goal to have this complete data that is reliable, that is updated, in order to use that in many fashions, so that this could be transformed into some added value. So these data management systems have several dimensions. So you can see a summary of them on the table on the screen. It's quite a complex topic, and therefore we'll go quite quickly about this. One of the dimensions is certainly the strategy, which is defining the added value that we are looking for, that we want to create with the data, what are the goals, what are the imperatives, the priorities, what is the schedule or calendar, and what are the resources. Of course, before entering such work, we need to be able to link this with the enterprise or company strategy. We have the governance aspects for the data. What are the structures in charge of managing the data, the responsibilities, and the rules for acquisition, distribution, archiving, and destructing the data, because the data depend on their own life cycle. They're not eternal. How will we manage the flux of data and the life cycle of this data, and how will they be protected? And we also have data quality policy, which gathers the organizational and technological measures taken and ensure that the data are correct, complete, and updated. And also, we will see the use for the data. That's what I was saying earlier on by mentioning some use cases with some examples. So therefore, we have the whole aspect regarding the architecture of the data on one hand, and the technological elements that will be used in order to collect, stock, distribute, and transform this data. So these are some elements that are quite complex and more of a technical nature. And finally, we also have the issue of the safety and security of the data and everything that is also linked to cyber security. And as one of the speakers was saying in one of the roundtables yesterday, the recent problems encountered by the GAFAM has shown the importance of such aspect. So, with that, going further into details, I wanted to show you what results from some work carried out by Chorus recently regarding the management and governance of data, which has enabled us to interview different kinds of financial institutions, such as banks, insurance companies, aggregators, fintechs, microfinance institutions. And we saw that we had an organizational diagram that we tend to observe in all these institutions, and all of these institutions tend to have such a setup which consists of putting aside from the IT unit, which is normally there for the development and exploitation of the data, but to also set up independently what we call a data team, which would include some data managers in charge of managing the data system, also some data scientists who tend to develop some models, such as the scoring models or some algorithms for other uses, with or without machine learning, and also some data analysts who, in general, tend to be there as a supporting and as a supporter to the commercial units in order to analyze the data according to their needs. So this data team works in interaction with the data users, with, in the first place, for a startup, for an organization that starts rather with the data management, just the use of dashboards needed by the users. Otherwise, the data teams carry out that work from A to Z, saying what do you need in terms of dashboard, in terms of models, templates, and so forth. And then this is realized for you. And within an organization that becomes more mature in this data management, simply with making available some tools for the users, such as, for example, some BIs, as long as the users have acquired themselves some expertise in the use of these tools, so that they themselves are able to then go and gather the data they're interested in and treat them in order to get the results they are looking for, certainly in terms of reporting and analysis, and maybe less so in terms of models and algorithms. So this is the kind of setup that we find very frequently, or certainly within about the 20 financial institutions that we have had the chance to talk to, and to us. To conclude, this enables us to encourage the financial institutions in their reflection at the same time as they're setting up some digital and digitalization projects in order to digitalize their data, services, and processes, for them to think about how they will manage the data and how they will set up such systems in order to economize some some costs that could be caused by dealing with this data coming up from different systems that we call legacy costs. So these costs are almost inevitable because, as I stated, the data oftentimes come from several different systems, but the earlier we set up a global data management system, the less the costs will be high. And therefore, this is the message that we want to communicate at the end of this presentation. Right, that's it. Many thanks for your attention. And maybe now we will, first of all, before taking your questions, report the results from the little polls that were launched in parallel with our presentation. First of all, and this is very interesting, we have asked the question to you: what were the factors that were the most important for the digitalization of your services? And we can see that most of you have replied that this is the will from the management to set up a digital strategy. So this is a very encouraging result, as we see here that digitalization, or the effort in terms of digitalization, is probably part of a strategic reflection from the leadership team and the management team, and therefore with the thinking around the added value that this digitalization will create, whether added value for the client or added value for the employees or for the institution itself, as we have recommended during this presentation. So this is an interesting result. In second position, we have 29% of you who replied that the competitors were the main factor. And we can understand that clearly, even if we say, well, please beware, do not let yourself be influenced by a ill-thought-out strategy in terms of the digitalization of your processes and services simply because you feel the pressure from your competitors. The fact is, this pressure exists, and I would say that no financial institutions this day, whichever institution we're talking about, could go without a reflection on the digitalization of their services. And nevertheless, this does not prevent us from thinking accordingly about the added value that I wish to create and how this can be inserted in the strategy. What is the reason for me to enter a partnership? What will be the exchange terms between my institution and the partner? And therefore, all these important matters that we have insisted upon during this presentation. Then, you have also replied to that question, what was digitalized in your institution? And you had many possible answers, and we can see that most of you, 16% of you, are saying payment systems and money transfer systems, which is not surprising because, of course, this was at the forefront of the digitalization of services, and this really meets a real need from the clients. And I can say that this is a general trend these days to digitalize these services. And then internal processes are important for 21% of you, and credit products, such as credit products, internal processes, payment services, and money transfer services, and much less so account openings or funds collection services or savings collection services, or the client information, which are all the push messages that could be sent to clients in order to improve the quality of the service. So this is what we wanted to share back with you. And there is a third poll question that should be sent to you, and it would be very good if you could reply to this, even if we maybe would not have the time to comment the results within this particular presentation right now. So, Astrid, have you noticed any other questions that you would like to answer?
Don't hesitate to ask your questions. You still have 17 minutes, and we'll be able to answer them. At the moment, we haven't received any questions. We have received the result of the poll for the main objective of the digitization of the services, the channel of distribution and internal processes. So it's very interesting to see that the priority, the objective of digitization was to improve the service to the client. So the fact that it's quicker and a better access for the client. The cost and control of the risk have not been mentioned. And as we said before, so digitization is also the link with the competitivity, and the importance is given to the clients. Don't hesitate to ask some questions directly on the chat. We just received the results from the third poll, and thank you for participating to this poll. The question was, in terms of management of the data, what has already been done in your institution? And we can see that in the most cases, something has already been started. and especially the systematic stockage of the data in a database. That's in the majority of the cases. The second position, we have 1 or 2 units in charge of the data has been set up in terms of the IT unit. That's 18% of the people have answered this. Also, 18% a first work of identification of the data that are significant, pertinent, have been identified. And also, there is a count with less answers for the management and the governance. But what we can say that all the financial institutions that are participated to this presentation have answered that they are aware of the importance of the management of the data, beyond the strategy of digitization and processes, and they've started to stock those data and set up some units dedicated to the data management. So these are quite good news, and it shows that the importance that has been of this problematic of the data management. We received a question, and thank you very much for this question, for the approach that we recommend for the higher to put a priority in terms of digitization a bank. Thank you for this question that is very interesting, and that is a question that people often ask themselves when we speak about digitization. I would like to give you an example as an answer. Recently, I've helped an institution to elaborate the digital strategy. We've done some workshops and some dialogues. So we spoke about some projects, and we have tried to organize in a good way. So some subjects were more about the clients. Other topics was about the institution itself or about the employees. Also, we had a list of about between 20 and 25 projects organized in 4 big axes. We asked ourselves, how are we going to start? What are we going to do? Which project will be the first one? As I said earlier on, you may remember, for this institution, we have chosen to support the client with a method of priority called the RISE method. So for each project identified during the strategy, we have done this exercise of attribute 4 scores with a RISE score. Reach, impact, confidence, effort. And the score enabled us. Once you have your score, you can classify the project, so from the highest score to the lowest score, and this enables you to have your priority in a kind of easy way. The score RISE, to give more details on this method, this gives you a matrix with some figures that you have combined. And it's possible to use some indicators. For example, my effort, I will, for example, ponder it. I will evaluate it from 1 to 5. The degree of confidence, I will use a scale from 0 to 10, for example. So you can play a little bit with a scoring, with the various indicators used for the scoring. And when we have done this exercise, the projects, they came with a higher score, confirmed that was the project that we were going to start in priority. There are different methods in terms of setting the priority for the projects. This method, the RISE method, seemed to us very appropriate for the digitization projects. And for projects that are a kind of a criteria of time that's very important. For example, a digitization project is very important at a given time. If you're waiting, for example, for a couple of years, this project may not be as important. The digital project is very important on a market. Either the digitization exists or not. Either it has already been started by the competition, or not. So you have to jump on the train. So you mustn't wait too long, and not spend too much time to hesitate. There is a right time to start a given project. So digitization today in the African economies is something that is really growing and evolving very quickly, and it's important to react very quickly, to jump on the train, but at the same time, you mustn't hurry and start a project without having evaluated the 5 criteria that I mentioned earlier on. Which targets, which objective, the control of the processes, the capacities, the partners, and so on and so on. Those all are elements that need to be taken in account. The RISE methodology is quite well known, and you can find a lot of information on it on internet.
Okay. Nous avons reçu 2 autres questions.
Okay, we have received other questions, several questions, in fact. And next, the 2 questions seem very interesting, and we thank you for these. The first one is what commercial approach proposal for clients who are scared of any change? This is a very good question, because this issue always raises its head when we launch some digital products or some products offered through some digital channels. And what we have to say on that point is that, first of all, as we were saying earlier on, we need to ensure clearly that the product corresponds to a real expectation from and a real need from the client base, which means that concretely we need to be able to answer the question, which is what is the main problem that clients encounter to do today, and what will be the solution offered, whether we're talking about the reliability of the transaction, the speed of transaction, a better understanding of the service, whatever that issue, we need to be able to answer that question. So before launching the product, we will first of all need to be able to answer that question on the basis of some conversations that we'll have had with our client base, with a particular pool of discussions we will have had with some clients, so to make sure that we will launch something that corresponds to a real problem that needs a solution. Then, afterwards, it's very possible to test before the launch and before investing. We can target the product or the service in an environment that is a reduced environment, and ask some clients to use this in order to see what is happening, what are the points that are understood, the ones that are less understood, what are the sequences in terms of the tasks to be carried out on the screen that are easier to deal with, etc. Then we can also launch a pilot phase of it, a pilot project, once the product is set up properly. And then, of course, afterwards, we can work on explaining and supporting the clients base through some agents, either remotely or in proximity. So we have an investment to do in order to ensure that the product will be well understood and accepted by the client base. Oh, sorry, maybe you want to answer another question? Yes, I have another question, but if you wanted to ask to add something else, well, there are many questions about accepting change and the fact that we're dealing with some populations sometimes located in rural zones for the FMI. client bases who might not be very at ease with these kind of topics. Maybe the response in the same way that we have explained that as for the institution, it's important to look at costs and benefits ratio before launching a project. And I would say this would have the same approach with our clients in order to convince a client to adopt digital services. And therefore, it's important to put forward the benefits. And I can assure you from my experience that if you show, especially if I'm talk to you about cocoa producer in a rural zone, for example, if you can show the cocoa producer that thanks to your digital service, he will be able to transfer his money in order to repay his credit terms and loans. Oh, well, it seems that we cannot hear you anymore, Astrid. Well, for example, if you're talking about 5,000 CFA francs that need to be reimbursed, he will be easily convinced. So it's important for the credit services and the client managers who are close to their clients to really put forward in a very practical manner the gains from the client side. Yes, of course. What we can add to this is that, as for the illiterate client basis, the self-service from a computer screen might be quite difficult. But in any case, as for computers in rural areas, you do not find many of them there. However, regarding anything to go through some terminals such as telephones, whether they're smartphones or not, it's much easier, and we can adapt the menus so that this can be quite easily understood even by illiterate clients. But let's not forget also that if people are sometimes lacking reading skills, for example, they know how to manage in one way or another. That's what we always notice. People find a way to manage. They end up understanding whether they have to click to the right or to the left to say yeah or to no, to choose such an amount or another amount. They know how to read the amounts. Oftentimes, they might not be able to read the text, but certainly they can understand the amounts. And if there are some difficulties to start with, people always know how to find somebody who will help them. You might have a local trader that will go and get his daughter who is not illiterate and then get some help that way, and therefore will understand how the service works. And let's not be too pessimistic regarding illiterate people or not. People might be illiterate, but yet they are intelligent. Please believe me on that point. Right. So, I think that we only have 2 or 3 minutes left. So somebody has asked us what is the right approach that an FMI can use to secure that data. There is no simple answer to that question. This covers many aspects. First of all, their data, the data that they collect about their clients and are saving them in the database. Then what we have the whole internal management system to deal with the authorizations to grant access to that data or systems which can transform that data. And it's extremely important to ensure that the original data remain unchanged, or in any case, as long as they are still valid, because they are often updated every day, in fact, and sometimes even every hour, depending on the systems at our disposal. But yet, to always have a stock of data that we talk that is the unique, the secret source of truth. This is what we use as jargon. This is the first thing we need to ensure, and of course, we then need to deal with who is ability to have access to this data, especially with confidential data and data related to people. Once the data is exchanged with some external organizations, then you have more complex systems to be set up in IT, with IT departments, which consist in controlling the flux of this data and to ensuring that we will not be able to just get access to them from the outside. And these are questions that IT engineers will be able to answer for you. Typically, how do you make sure that this data does not end up being pirated data? And I would certainly not be able to give you some details on that front, because this would be way above what we are presenting here today. Right, I think that we have reached the end of that presentation, and we really thank you for your attention. We were delighted to present that presentation to you, and we also thank the whole team in charge of managing the presentation. And we now say goodbye and see you soon, maybe. Many thanks, Astrid. Many thanks to you all. Thank you. Bye-bye.